The wolves moved before I did. That is the part I return to even now, when I am trying to explain to my counsel how any of it began, before the mark, before the choosing, before Verk lifted his great silver head and sang to the night sky in a way no one living had ever heard him sing. It began before all of that, in the half hour before the gate opened, when the pack's wolves simply stopped what they were doing and turned north. It was the fourth evening of the first frost. I was standing on the inner wall walk as I often did at that hour, watching the torches come up along the courtyard below, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once the way a king does when he has held a kingdom alone for 9 years and has learned not to call the weight by its name. The great wolf yards of Ironvein spread out beneath me, 12 acres of frost-silvered earth, old stone, and the quiet movement of the pack's wolves as they settled in for the night. 31 of them. Every one a working wolf, bonded to a family, trained to the border runs, none of them given to fuss or sentiment. They were a steady lot. That was the word most often used for them in the old keeper's records, steady. In 40 years of entries, no keeper had once written that the Ironvein wolves had been startled by an arriving traveler. Wolves do not greet strangers. They tolerate them at best, with the resigned courtesy of creatures who understand that human beings require a certain amount of managed coexistence. So when every one of them, all 31, from the oldest in their sleeping places along the south wall to the youngest still rough tumbling near the water troughs, turned at the same moment and faced the north gate with their ears lifted, I noticed. I stood very still. The gatekeeper had not yet called the approach bell. I heard nothing from the road, but the wolves had gone still in a way that was not alarm. Their tails were not lowered, their hackles were not up. They looked like a congregation waiting for something they had been told would come. I had never seen 31 wolves achieve perfect stillness at the same moment. I had never seen them look, collectively, as though they were expecting someone. Then the bell rang. A single traveler. The report came down the wall in the usual way. A woman, alone, on foot, no pack colors, no companion, seeking one night's shelter from the coming weather. The gateman's note added in his careful hand that she carried a rolled sky chart under one arm and a small iron lantern in the other, and that she gave her name as Wren, no family name, no pack affiliation, calling herself a moon reader by trade. A moon reader. I had not heard that word in some years. There had been a generation of them, wandering women who read the night sky for settlements and border farms, who tracked the moon's phases against the old charts for storm timing, for planting seasons, for the thin stretch of autumn weather in which a pack could safely move its herds north before the snow locked everything in. They were not wolves. They held no bond. They belonged to no territory and answered to no alpha, which was both what made them useful and what made them, to most council members, untrustworthy. A woman with no pack was a woman with no accountability. That was the usual reasoning, stated with the particular confidence of men who had never had their access to shelter questioned. My council's steward, Aldrich, was already on the lower walkway when I came down from the wall. He had heard the gateman's report, and I could see from 20 paces away that his mind was made up. "One night," I said before he could speak. He pressed his lips together. "My lord, a moon reader. No bond, no affiliation. We know nothing of where she has come from or what she may have carried through the border settlements. In the current season, with the northern passes still unsecured, and with the Greyfall families sending their harvest wagons through our roads." "One night," I said again. "She is on foot in the first frost, and I will not turn a woman away from the gate in that. Give her the east guest room above the wolf yard. She can leave at first light." Aldrich's expression made clear what he thought of the east guest room, which had the wolf yard directly below its window and was therefore the noisiest accommodation in the hold. He did not say so. He went to arrange it, and I went to the upper hall, and I told myself I would not think about the wolves again. I thought about the wolves again before I had reached the second landing. There was a warmth between my shoulder blades that had no right to be there. I was not running. The hold was cold in the way it was always cold at the first frost, a particular chill that came up through the stone floors and sat in the joints of your hands if you stood still too long. I had felt it every year for 9 years and never found it anything but uncomfortable. But that evening, climbing the stairs toward the upper hall, there was warmth at my back the way there is warmth from a good fire when you have turned away from it, not hot, not discomforting but present. A reminder that heat exists in the world and that you are near it. I stopped on the landing and stood there for a moment, which is not a thing I did. I was not, by nature, a man who stood on landings for no reason. But I stood there for perhaps 20 seconds before I moved on, and I could not have told you what I was waiting to feel, only that I was waiting for something. I am telling this in the order I understood it, which is not the order it happened. What I did not know that evening, what I would not understand for 2 more days, was that the warmth was the bond's first note. Not the recognition, not the full knowledge, not the moment of certainty. Just a tone, low and distant, the way you might hear a single instrument from a far room and not yet know you are listening to music. Her name was Wren. She was given the East guest room. I did not see her that first evening. I was in the council chamber until late, going over the border reports with my senior keeper, and by the time I came out the hold was quiet and the torches in the East corridor had been banked for the night. I went to bed, as I did, and I lay awake for a while, as I did, and I thought about the wolves standing still and the warmth on my back on the stairs, and then I stopped thinking about either and went asleep. In the morning she was still there. Not because she had defied my gatekeeper or made any argument for staying. She was in the wolf yard at dawn, sitting cross-legged on the cold ground with her back against the old stone wall and her sky chart open across her knees, and every wolf in the yard was around her. I'm not describing a polite gathering. I'm not describing a few wolves lingering near a visitor out of curiosity, the way they sometimes did with new arrivals who smelled interesting. I am describing all 31 of the Iron Vein pack wolves arranged around a woman they had never met before, some lying against her legs, some pressed in close at her back, the 2 youngest draped half across her lap in a way that was, there is no other word for it, proprietary. As though they had decided collectively that she was theirs and had organized themselves accordingly. I stood at the upper window of the East corridor for a long moment, looking down. She was not doing anything to encourage them. She was reading her chart, tracing something with one finger, her lips moving slightly the way some people do when they are reading numbers. Her hair was loose and pushed back from her face by the cold. She was plainly dressed, no pack colors, a wool traveling cloak that had seen considerable wear. The wolves did not appear to require her attention. They seemed simply to want to be near her in the way that any creature wants to be near warmth, and had arranged themselves accordingly without ceremony. 31 wolves, 40 years of keeper records that noted no stranger had drawn them. And this woman, who had arrived on foot with a sky chart and a name with no family in it, sitting in the frost at dawn as though she had always been there. I went down. She heard my step on the yardstone and looked up, and she did not scramble to her feet the way most visitors did when I appeared unexpectedly in my own courtyard. She looked at me with clear, steady eyes the color of winter water, and she said, "Good morning, my lord. I should be gone within the hour. I only wanted to check the morning's reading before I set out, and somehow I acquired company." Her voice was unhurried. I noticed this because most people who spoke to me were hurried or careful or both. She was neither. "How long has it been like this?" I asked, meaning the wolves. "Since I opened the window last night," she said. Verk was already at the gate when I looked out, and by midnight the others had joined him. "I hope it has not caused any disruption." I tried to come down quietly so as not to wake the yard keeper. Verk. I had not told her the great wolf's name. There was no reason she would know it. The wolves' names were not announced to visitors. The older wolves' names in particular were considered a sort of private matter, recorded in the keeper's logs and known within the pack but not broadcast. Werk was the oldest wolf in the yard. He was a silver and gray creature of extraordinary size, and he had been at Ironvin longer than I had, older than my own tenure as Alpha King, one of the original wolves bonded to the hold under my father's reign. He let no one touch him but me and the head keeper, Marin, and even with us he was reserved in the manner of very old things that have learned the cost of easy trust. He was currently lying with his great head in the Moonreader's lap. "You know his name," I said. She glanced down at Werk, then back at me. "He told me," she said simply. I pulled over the yard's low mounting block and sat down across from her, because my knees were telling me that standing in the cold at dawn was no longer comfortable, and because I wanted to look at her while she explained what she meant by that. She was not fanciful about it. She spoke matter-of-factly, the way she appeared to speak about everything. Sometimes, when a wolf wanted to be known, they carried the knowing of their name like a warmth in the air, and she had a gift. She did not call it a gift. She called it a tendency for receiving that kind of warmth. She had had it since she was a girl. It was one of the reasons she had drifted toward sky reading as a craft. You spent a great deal of time alone at night, which suited someone who was better at listening to creatures than at navigating the social arrangements of pack life. "Does it trouble you," I asked, "the drifting?" She considered this honestly, which I found unusual. Most people, when a king asked them a personal question, gave the answer they assumed he wanted. She turned the question over and then she said, "It did, for a few years. Then I decided it was simpler to be the thing I was rather than the thing I was supposed to be, and after that it didn't trouble me much." The thing she was rather than the thing she was supposed to be. I sat with that sentence for a moment. Aldrich appeared at the yard gate at the 3rd hour and cleared his throat in his particular way that meant he had an opinion he was trying to convey without stating it directly. I looked at him. He looked at the wolves surrounding the woman on the ground, his expression moving through several distinct registers of disapproval, starting at professional concern, passing through something that might have been bewilderment, and settling in the uncomfortable territory of a man who recognizes that what he is looking at does not fit any category he was trained to manage. Then he looked at me. "Council this morning, my lord," he said. "I know," I stood. "She stays another night. Send the east guest room a proper breakfast, not the traveler's portion." Aldrich made the sound of a man who had much to say and had decided this was not the moment for it. He retreated. I looked down at Wren, who had returned to her chart. "You don't have to stay," I said. "The invitation is given, not imposed." "I know," she said, without looking up. "The morning's reading is promising. I would like to do the evening one from your tower if you'll allow it. I haven't had a clear sight line to the northern quarter in 2 weeks. I had a tower on the eastern corner of the hold that had been used by the old sky readers in my grandfather's time, before the practice had fallen out of fashion in the settled packs. It had a flat roof and a clear sight line all the way to the northern horizon, and it had been unused for as long as I could remember. Its door stuck half open with the particular stubbornness of old hinges. I had walked past it 10,000 times and never thought about it. I said yes. The council meeting that morning was the ordinary kind: border reports, supply assessments, a dispute about grazing rights between 2 families in the pack's outer settlements. I paid attention to the things that required attention and let Aldrich manage the things that did not, which was our established arrangement. But somewhere in the 2nd hour, during a discussion about the North Road resupply schedule, I became aware that the warmth was there again, lower now, steadier, like something that had been lit the night before and was burning in a small and patient way. A coal, not a flame, something that did not require tending to persist. I told myself it was the hall's hearth. The hall's hearth was behind me. After the council, I went to the wolf yard again. I told myself I was checking on the wolves, which was a thing I did regularly and which required no explanation. The wolves were where I had left them, more or less, arranged around the east wall, settled in the mid-morning sun with the easy companionability of creatures that have decided a place is worth staying in. Wren was not among them. The chart case was gone from where she had propped it. But Verk was still lying against the base of the east wall, watching the door to the east guest stare with the particular attentiveness of a wolf that expected someone to come through it. I stood in the yard for a while, watching him watch the door. In 40 years of keeper records, I had read them, all of them, in the first years of my tenure when I was trying to understand the hold I had inherited. There was not a single entry noting that Verk had waited for anyone. He moved, or he didn't. He came when I called, out of something that was perhaps loyalty, and perhaps simply the habit of a very long association. He did not wait. He did not station himself at a door for the purpose of being present when it opened. The concept was simply not in any account of him. I went back to my work. I had a kingdom to attend to, and a moon reader was not my concern. That evening, I climbed to the eastern tower and found her there. She had the door fully open. The hinges had apparently required only the persuasion of a few drops of oil from her pack, which she had applied with the practical efficiency of someone accustomed to managing obstacles quietly. She was setting up her instruments on the flat roof when I arrived at the top of the stairs. A long brass sighting rod, a folded measuring rule, a small glass she used. She explained without looking up from what she was doing, to separate out the finer points of the moon's edge for detailed readings. The sky was still dusky blue in the west, fading toward a clear black in the north. The first stars were beginning to press through. "You should not have had to oil the hinges yourself," I said. I didn't mind. She fitted the sighting rod into its stand with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times in 1,000 different locations. I've opened more difficult doors than this. I meant to go back down. I had come only to ensure the tower was fit for use and that she had everything she needed, both of which were evident without my further presence. I had a full evening's work in the upper hall. The border dispatches had arrived that afternoon, and there were 3 letters requiring personal response and a set of supply figures that my quartermaster had flagged for review. I did not go back down. I sat on the low stone parapet at the tower's northern edge and watched the stars come out. I had not done that, simply sat and watched the stars come out, in more years than I could easily count. There had always been something more pressing. There had always been letters and reports, and the weight of every decision that fell only to me because I had not arranged things differently. Because I had told myself for 9 years that the kingdom needed a present king more than it needed a mated one, and that when I found the time and the right arrangement I would address the question of a queen, and the years had a way of accumulating quietly while you were looking at other things. She worked in silence, and I found the silence agreeable in a way I had not expected. Most silences in the hold were the silences of people being careful around me. Hers was different. It was the silence of someone who was simply occupied and did not require anything from the air around her. After a while she began to speak, not to me exactly, but not to me. The way people sometimes narrate a task aloud when they are comfortable, noting what she was reading in the northern quadrant, a pressure system building 2 days out, good conditions following after. Her voice moved in and out of technical terms that I only half followed, but the sound of it was easy, unhurried, threaded through with a quiet certainty that she knew what she was seeing and trusted it. "You've been alone up here a long time," she said at some point. I assumed she meant the tower. She looked at me briefly, then back at her instruments, and I understood she had not meant the tower. 9 years, I said after a moment. She made a quiet sound of acknowledgement, not pity and not the false sympathy I was accustomed to from visitors who learned the fact of my solitude and felt obliged to offer a response. Just acknowledgement, the way you might acknowledge a weather reading. It is what it is. Let us note it and continue. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked, "having a pack?" She thought about this for the same unhurried beat she had given my earlier question. "I had one," she said. "I was bonded to the Fenwick settlement in the South until I was 23. Then I was not." She fitted a different glass into the sighting rod's end. "I missed it for a while. Then I decided the sky was a sufficient pack, if you knew how to read it. It is reliable in a way that settlements are not." "What happened?" I asked. And then, because that was more forward than I intended, "You don't have to say." "A man chose another woman," she said plainly. "As men sometimes do. And the pack arranged itself around the choice, as packs sometimes do, and there was less room in it for me than there had been. The spaces we occupy in a pack's life are not as permanent as we are told they are when we are young. They shift when the important people in them make different choices, and the pack accommodates the shift, and you find yourself standing slightly outside the shape of things without anyone having made a deliberate decision to leave you there. It simply happens." She paused. "So I left before I was asked to. I found it cleaner." I thought about this. I thought about a young woman leaving a settlement with a sky chart and a small lantern because a man had looked elsewhere, and her pack had contracted around the new arrangement, and she had understood before they told her that she was no longer quite part of the shape of things. I thought about the particular dignity in leaving before being asked, in declining to make anyone responsible for a discomfort they had not technically caused. I thought about 8 years of clear northern skies and cold rooftops, and the company of creatures who communicated in warmth and certainty, and how a person who had learned to read the stars as company might be better at hearing certain kinds of truth than someone who had spent all their years inside the noise of a settled hall. "I am sorry," I said. "That should not have been allowed to happen." She glanced at me. There was something in her expression that was not quite surprise, more like the look of someone who has been handed a thing they were not expecting and are assessing whether it is real. "Thank you," she said quietly. Verk appeared at the top of the stairs then, which startled me because the eastern tower stairs were steep, and I had never in my life seen Verk climb more than a single flight. He was old, and his hips troubled him in the cold, and he typically confined himself to the yard and the lower corridors, tolerating the main hall on formal occasions only because he had decided, at some point in his long life, that the Alpha King's formal occasions were part of his obligation. The stairs were not part of his obligation. He had made this clear through consistent practice. But there he was, moving with careful dignity across the flat roof, each step placed with deliberate care, and he went directly to Wren's side and pressed himself against her hip, and she reached down without looking away from her instruments and laid one hand on his back. He made a sound I had never heard him make. Not a whine, not a bark, a low, resonant exhalation that moved through his chest like music, like a word in a language I knew the shape of but could not quite hear. It was not a sound of need or distress. It was a sound of arrival, the sound a creature makes when it has been looking for something and has, at last and without fanfare, found it. I felt it in my sternum. Not the warmth this time, something deeper, more specific, like a name spoken just out of range of the actual word. I sat very still, the way the wolves had sat still the evening before, waiting for a sound to resolve into something I could understand. It did not resolve entirely, but I did not move for a long time, and the cold of the parapet under my hands and the clear dark sky overhead and the steady quiet of her at her work and Verk against her side made a picture that I knew, even then, I was going to carry. She left the following morning. This had always been the arrangement, one night, extended to 2, and then she was a traveler again with a road to follow and northern settlements waiting on her readings. I was at the gate when she came out. This was not something I had planned. I had woken early, earlier than usual, and found myself in the upper corridor without a clear accounting of how I had gotten there, and Aldrich had intercepted me at the east stair with a look of exhausted patience that suggested he was becoming accustomed to the king appearing in corridors at odd hours without his attendants. He said nothing, which was more eloquent than most things he said. She was dressed for the road, the chart case strapped across her back, the small lantern in her hand. The wolves were at the gate, all of them, again, arranged with the same collective certainty as before, not blocking her way, simply present, unwilling to pretend that her leaving was an ordinary thing. She stopped when she saw me. "You did not have to come down," she said. "I know," I said. We stood there for a moment in the particular awkwardness of a departure that neither person knows how to correctly begin, each of us holding something that had no established form yet, and therefore no established way of being handed off or set down. "The 2-day storm I mentioned," she said. "It will track northeast. If you send the border riders out on the second morning after it passes, the roads will be clear for a full day before the next front moves in. It would be a good window for the North Road supply run." I had not told her about the border riders or the road condition problems we had been managing all autumn. I had not mentioned the North Road supply run or the scheduling difficulty we had been trying to solve for 3 weeks. She should not have known to say that. I looked at her. "The reading," she said simply. "Where will you go?" I asked. "North," she said. "There are 2 smaller settlements past the ridge that have been asking for a winter reading, and I told them I would come before the heavy snow. It's a 3-day walk in good weather, and the weather will hold for another 4 days." 3 days, on foot, alone in the first serious cold of the season, on roads I knew to be uneven and poorly marked in the northern stretch past the ridge. "Take one of the horses," I said. "My lord." "Not a gift, alone, have it sent back from the ridge settlement when you arrive." I paused. "Or don't if the roads are difficult. The horse can winter there." She looked at me for a moment with those clear winter-water eyes, and I looked back, and there was something passing between us in the cold morning air that I did not have a name for yet and was not ready to name, but which was present and undeniable in the way that the warmth on the stairs had been present. A thing the air knew even if I did not. "Thank you," she said, "for the horse and for the other things, both." "Come back when the northern readings are done," I said. "The tower is yours whenever you need the sight line." She smiled then, the first time I had seen a full smile from her, unhurried and real, the kind of smile a person keeps for moments when they are not thinking about being seen. It did something complicated to the region of my chest that I chose not to examine until she was through the gate. The wolves watched her go. Verk stood at the gate long after the others had dispersed, watching the road until she was gone from sight. Then he turned and looked at me. He had amber eyes, old and clear. I had looked into those eyes for 9 years and seen many things: weariness, patience, the particular regard of a very old and very loyal creature who had decided long ago that I was worth staying near even when I was not particularly easy company. I had never seen in them what I saw that morning. He was waiting for me to understand something, and he was, in his patient and ancient way, willing to wait as long as it took. "I know," I said out loud to a wolf in my own gate-yard in the first light of a cold morning. He turned and walked back to his place along the south wall, and I stood at my own gate and watched the empty road for longer than was dignified, which was, I understood distantly, a thing I was allowed to do. It took me 4 days to send a message north. This is not the number I am proud of. In my defense, I was a king with a kingdom, and I spent those 4 days attending to it with perhaps excessive focus. The border dispatches, the supply assessments, the grazing rights dispute that had still not been resolved, a long meeting about the spring road resurfacing plan that was at least 2 weeks premature, but which I sat through completely rather than excuse myself as I normally would have done. I reviewed 3 sets of accounts that did not strictly require my personal attention. I approved a patrol rotation schedule in more detail than any king needed to involve himself in. I was, in short, a man in determined avoidance of the particular thought that kept arriving despite the avoidance. On the fourth evening, I wrote the message. It was a practical message. It said that a window in the Northern Road schedule had opened somewhat earlier than expected, and that if she found herself finishing at the Ridge settlements before the next front, the Ironving Gate would not be difficult to reach. It said that Verk had eaten very little since she had left, which was true, and which I included because it seemed like information she might want to have and not for any other reason. It said that I hoped the readings had been useful and the roads had been fair. It was signed with my name, which I also do not report proudly, as kings do not typically sign personal messages with their own names like an anxious young man who is not certain the recipient knows who he is. But I wrote it and I sent it, and when it was gone I sat in the upper hall for a while in the quiet and felt, for the first time in 9 days, that the coal in my chest was burning at a sustainable rate. She arrived 11 days later, on a clear cold afternoon, with the first hard frost of the deep season crunching underfoot. She had the horse. She had another sky chart, a larger one, the northern charts, rolled and strapped to the saddle. She was wearing a different cloak, heavier, with a fur lining at the collar that she had apparently acquired at the Ridge settlement in trade for something I did not ask about. She looked well. She looked settled in a way that was different from the alertness of a traveler, as though the road had given her something rather than costing her something, and she had arrived with more than she had left with. Verk was at the gate before the road bell. He moved through the yard at a pace that was not dignified for a wolf of his age and temperament, a controlled urgency, the movement of something very old and very certain moving towards something it has been waiting for. He crossed the frost-hard ground and stopped when he reached her and pressed his whole great side against her legs, and she knelt in the frost and put both arms around his neck, and he went entirely still. Then he began to howl. It was not a distress howl. It was not a warning. I knew every sound in the Ironvane wolf yard, had known them since I was a boy, had catalogued them as a young king still learning what he had inherited. The howl that Verk gave in that moment was none of the sounds I knew. It was the oldest sound I had ever heard a wolf make, something that came from the deep chest of a very old creature, a sound that was not alarm or loss or joy, but all three wound together, resolved into a single long note that hung in the cold air over the yard and rang off the stone walls and made every wolf in the yard lift their head and be still. It was a calling in, a final reading, a sound that meant here and mine and done and this one. The other wolves answered. I stood in the yard with the frost under my boots and the wolves answering around me and Wren still kneeling in the cold with her arms around Verk's neck, and I felt the warmth between my shoulder blades for the last time as a mystery, because it was no longer a mystery. It was the simplest thing in the world, which is perhaps why it had taken me 4 days to send a message and 9 years to wonder if I was ready, because the simplest things are always the ones we take the longest to reach. I crossed the yard. She heard me coming and lifted her face from Verk's neck and looked at me, and there was nothing guarded in her expression, none of the wariness that I had come to expect from people who were looking at their king rather than at the person behind the title. She looked at me the way she had looked at her instruments in the tower, with clear attention, without agenda, waiting to see what was true. "He's been well," I said, which was not what I meant to say, "since you left." "I know," she said, "he told me." I crouched down across from her, with Verk between us so that I was at her level. A king did not kneel in his own gate yard for convenience. I did it anyway. "I sent the message because I told myself it was practical," I said. "It was not practical." "I know," she said again. There was a warmth at the corners of her eyes that was not quite amusement and not quite tenderness, and was both of those things at once. I have not been looking," I said carefully. "Not for," I stopped, which was rare for me. I was, under most circumstances, a man who knew what words he wanted. "I was not expecting you." "I know," she said, for the third time in the same gentle way, and I understood that she had received the message and had come back to this hold with its frost-hard yard and its stubborn tower door, and its 31 wolves, not because of the sightline, and not because of the horse, and not even because of Verk's amber eyes reading her faithfully. She had come back because I had sent a message that was not practical, and she had understood what it was and had made her own choice freely. I offered her my hand, not a king's gesture, not the formal offering that was part of ceremony, the thing my counsel had been suggesting with varying degrees of directness for 9 years. A man's gesture. Here, this, whatever this is, I am offering it. She looked at my hand for a moment. I should tell you, she said, that I am not a settled woman. I have not been settled in 8 years. I do not know how to be the thing a pack expects a queen to be. I do not know the arrangements, the precedences, the ways things are supposed to be done in a hold like this. I will probably do them wrong, and I will not always know that I am doing them wrong, and that will be difficult for your counsel. Yes, I said, it will be. And I will want the tower, she said. On clear nights, I cannot stop what I do because there is a hall to manage. It's yours, I said. It always was. She put her hand in mine. The warmth that came through that contact was not the distant note I had been feeling for 2 weeks, the low and faraway signal of something the bond was trying to tell me without knowing how to arrive yet. This was the full thing. This was the warmth of recognition, the warmth of every wolf in the yard turning at once toward a gate that had not yet opened, the warmth of Werk on the tower stairs in the cold blue dark choosing a different obligation, the warmth of 31 wolves finding their way to a woman who carried nothing recognizable of their world, and yet was, undeniably, of it. It moved through my hand and up my arm, and settled somewhere in the center of my chest like something that had been traveling a long way, and had finally arrived at the place it was always meant to reach. Not a landing, not an end, the particular quality of warmth that comes when you understand at last that you are in the right place. Werk lifted his head from between us and regarded me with his old amber eyes. I know, I said quietly, for the second time in my life. He settled his chin back on Ren's knee with the satisfaction of a very old wolf who has been telling a very patient truth for longer than anyone had the courtesy to listen. The 11 days she was gone at the ridge settlements were instructive in their own way. I did not realize, until she was absent, how much of my thinking in the previous 2 weeks had quietly organized itself around the fact of her presence in the hold. This is not something I could have reported accurately if asked on the day she left. I would have said that I had work, which was true, and that I had always found solitude sufficient, which had been true, and that the hold was the same hold it had always been, which was technically true and completely wrong. Werk did not eat properly for 5 days. I knew this because Maren reported it to me with the specific brevity she used when she wanted me to understand something without being told it directly, and I understood it directly, and I went to the wolf yard and sat with him for a while on the 4th evening and told him she was coming back. He looked at me with his amber eyes in the particular way he had of communicating that he was willing to take my word for something, but was not prepared to give up his position on the matter until the matter was resolved. On the 6th day, I reviewed the supply accounts again, which I had already reviewed. On the 7th day, I asked Maren, in what I intended as a casual inquiry, whether the ridge settlements typically sent word when their expected visitors arrived. She said they sometimes did, and sometimes did not, and looked at me in a way that contained an entire considered opinion expressed through eyebrow alone. I thanked her and left. On the 9th day, one of the younger council members suggested, at the end of a meeting on an entirely different subject, that the Alpha King might wish to consider whether it was wise to extend an open invitation to the tower to an unaffiliated traveler whose background and intentions were not fully known. He was 24 years old and newly appointed and spoke, with the confidence of someone who had not yet discovered how much he did not know. I looked at him for a moment. "Her background," I said, "is 8 years of solo travel through the Northern Territories in all weathers, providing readings that have saved settlements' harvests and predicted 3 significant storms that would otherwise have caught border camps unprepared. Her intentions, as far as I have been able to determine, are to read the sky accurately and to report what she finds. I find both of these things commendable. The tower will remain available to her." He did not raise the subject again. On the 11th day, she came through the gate. What came after was not simple. I want to record this honestly, because the stories that reach the settlements tend to acquire a polish that removes the difficulty, and the difficulty was real and should be honored. Aldrich spent 3 weeks in a state of controlled distress. The council had opinions, carefully worded, about the precedent of an unaffiliated alpha's mate, about the requirements of the bond formalization ceremony, and whether a woman with no pack standing could meet them in the customary form, about what the northern families would say when they heard the Alpha King of Ironvein had bonded to a wandering skyreader with no lineage and no territorial attachment. There was one council member, not the young one, but a senior man named Corthel, who had been on the council since my father's time, and who had the particular self-assurance of someone who believed that long service entitled him to long influence, who argued with more persistence than the others. He came to me privately twice, with concerns about the match that he framed as being in the kingdom's interest, and I listened to both visits fully, because he had not been wrong about everything over the years, and I was not a man who dismissed counsel without hearing it. But the second visit ended with him saying, in a tone that was more direct than was perhaps wise, that a queen who belonged to no pack and owed allegiance to no family was a queen who could not be trusted in the arrangements that held the kingdom together. I thought about this. I thought about 8 years of solo travel in the Northern Territories, of a woman who had left a settlement before she was asked because she found it cleaner, of a person who had spent years belonging to the sky because the sky did not ask her to be smaller than she was. "She belongs to the sky," I said, "and to this hold and to me. I have found all 3 of those to be reliable. I am not certain the same can be said of arrangements." I paused. "We are done with this conversation, Corthel." He retired with the expression of a man who had said his piece and had been heard, which I had done him the courtesy of ensuring he could truthfully report. Wren listened to the remaining concerns with the same clear-eyed attention she gave everything. She did not argue. She did not become defensive. She asked, in each case, which of the council's concerns were about the kingdom and which were about preference, and she engaged seriously with the kingdom ones and let the preference ones pass without comment. This was, I observed, a more effective approach than anything I had tried in 9 years of council meetings. Several members of the council found it discomfiting in a way they could not easily name, because they had been expecting either deference or defiance and received neither. When she was asked to speak formally to the full council on the question of her standing, she was precise and unhurried. "I will tell you what I know how to do," she said to the assembled hall. "I know how to read weather and seasons. I know how to find the signs in the north sky that tell you whether the passes will open early or lock late, and I know that knowledge in this form, correctly used, is worth more to your northern supply lines than most of what you are currently spending on road assessments. I know when to move and when to stay still, and I have found that most difficult situations improve considerably when the people responsible for them are willing to do one or the other. I know how to listen." She paused, and there was something in the pause that was not quite humor but was adjacent to it. "I have been told that kings sometimes have difficulty knowing when to stay still. I can help with that." There was a silence in the hall that was of a different quality than the silence that usually followed formal addresses. And then Aldrich, who had been managing his expression so carefully for 3 weeks that the effort had visibly aged him, made a sound that was a short, involuntary laugh, quickly suppressed, turned somewhat awkwardly into a cough. Two of the younger council members looked at their hands. My senior keeper, Marin, who was the oldest person in the room and whose opinion I valued above all others in the hall, allowed herself a small, definite smile. The smile of a woman who has been waiting for something sensible to arrive, and has, at last, heard it. "She'll do," said Marin clearly into the quiet. The formal ceremony was held at the winter solstice, on a night of clear cold sky and full moon. The same kind of sky Wren had been reading the first night in the tower, clear to the northern horizon, the stars very bright and very still. She wore a deep blue that she and Marin had chosen together over 2 long afternoons that I had not been permitted to observe, and from which they had both emerged with the satisfied expressions of people who had resolved something important that had been waiting to be resolved. She did not wear pack colors, and this was not because she rejected them. It was because Ironvin's colors were forest green, and the deep blue she chose was, she explained to me quietly the morning of the ceremony, the color of the sky in the hour before the first star came out, the sky that had been her pack for 8 years, and she wanted to carry it forward into what came next rather than leave it behind. I stood in the corridor outside the hall and listened to her say this, and I thought about all the evenings she had spent in that color, reading the sky over strange rooftops with no warm door to return to, belonging to the cold and the stars in the particular way that people belong to things that ask nothing of them except attention. I thought about the patience that required, and the loneliness that attended it, and the quality of heart that could sustain both without becoming hardened by either. I had not thought I could feel more certain of anything than I already did. I was wrong. The wolves came into the hall for the ceremony. This was not a thing that had happened before. The wolves were not hall animals, and bringing 31 of them into the ceremony hall among the assembled pack was, Aldrich noted for the record, irregular, unprecedented, and not covered by the existing protocol documents. I told him to open the side doors and let them in. They settled along the edges of the hall with the steadiness I had always valued in them, watching the proceedings with their quiet amber eyes, and Werk stood at my right side for the whole of the ceremony, with a gravity that I can only describe as ceremonial in its own right, as though he had been waiting to stand in exactly this place for exactly this occasion, and had always known it was coming. When I spoke the words of the bond and she spoke them back, and the mark appeared on us both, a clean silver white, brighter at first contact than any mark I had seen recorded in the keeper's books, spreading in a pattern that Marin said later she had seen once before, in the very old records from the founding families, the ones that described what the bond looked like when it arrived at full strength rather than settling gradually. The wolves made the sound. All 31 of them, at once, the way they had been still at once on that first evening, and then answered Werk's howl at the gate. A low, sustained harmony that rose and fell and rose again, and rang in the stone hall, and moved through the assembled pack in a way that was felt as much as heard. It was not alarm or loss or warning. It was the sound a pack makes when it receives something it has been waiting for without knowing, until now, exactly what it was. The council members stood very still. The pack families in the hall stood very still. Aldrich, to his lasting credit, did not express the opinion he was having, but only pressed his lips together and then quietly, carefully, gave the small formal bow that was the mark of acknowledgement. And then the council members followed, and then the hall, and the bow moved through the assembled pack the way the wolves' harmony had moved, without anyone directing it. That was all, that was enough. She came into Ironvin's accounting of itself that day as neither the woman the council had designed a place for nor the thing her old settlement had expected her to be. She came in as herself, moon reader, sky keeper, the one the wolves chose, the one Werk had waited for in 40 years of keeper records without anyone knowing he was waiting. She learned the hold's arrangements at her own pace and in her own order, and she made mistakes the way she had warned she would, and we worked through them together, and she made the council laugh twice in the first month, and made Aldrich rethink 3 supply procedures in the first season, because her weather readings were more accurate by a significant margin than the method we had been using, which had been essentially unchanged since my grandfather's time. He thanked her for this in his particular way, which was to say nothing about the methodology change directly, but to begin citing her readings in his reports as though this were a natural and long-established practice. I observed this for 2 weeks before mentioning it to her. She said she had noticed. I said I thought it was a significant concession for a man of Aldrich's temperament. She said she thought so too, and that she had been leaving her less critical readings in summary form on the council table on meeting mornings, in a consistent spot, in case they were useful. I asked her how long she had been doing that. She said since the 3rd week. I said I had not known. She said she knew I had not known. I thought about this conversation for some days afterward, about the quiet and patient way she had found to make herself useful without requiring anyone to formally acknowledge the usefulness, and about how a woman who had learned to read the sky alone on strange rooftops had also learned something about how to arrive in a new place without demanding that the place rearrange itself around her arrival. Corthell resigned his council position at the end of the first winter, citing his health, which was entirely possible and which I did not interrogate. The young council member who had raised concerns about the open invitation to the tower became, over the following 2 seasons, one of the more reliable voices on matters relating to the Northern Territories, because he had started reading the weather summaries and found them to be, in his own words, more practically useful than the assessments he had been relying on. He said this directly to Wren at a spring council meeting, with the slightly painful directness of a young man who has decided that acknowledging being wrong once will prevent him from having to acknowledge it again. She thanked him and gave him a 2-day forecast that proved to be accurate to within 4 hours, which he reported to the full council with visible satisfaction, as though he had discovered it himself. I think about the warmth on the stairs sometimes on that first evening, that small low note that I had not known what to do with, the bond's first word before I understood the language. I have thought about what I might have done differently if I had known sooner what it was saying. I might have come down to the yard faster. I might not have waited 4 days to send the message. I might have opened the tower door years ago and let some light into the part of myself that had decided, somewhere along the way, that the kingdom was the whole of it, and that everything else could wait. But I think, too, that the warmth knew what it was doing, arriving the way it did, low and patient and persistent, like a candle in a room you have not entered yet, making no demands, simply being there when you were finally ready to notice. Some things need the time they take. The wolves knew from the first moment. They required no convincing and no intermediary. I was the one who needed the time, and the bond, or the moon, or whatever it is that arranges these things, was kind enough to give it without complaint. The eastern tower has a new door now. It took 3 hours for the Hold's carpenter to fit it, and it swings open at a touch, and on clear evenings there is a light in the window at the top of it that I can see from the outer wall walk, and from the upper hall and from the yard. I know the sound of her step on the stairs by now, quiet and specific, the footfall of someone accustomed to moving through the dark without disturbing things. I know the particular quality of her silence when she is reading, and the different, charged quality of it when she is thinking about something she has not yet said to me. I know how she holds her shoulders when something in the northern readings is troubling, and I have learned, it took time, but I have learned it, to ask what she sees without requiring that she translate the whole sky into words I already understand. Sometimes I ask nothing, and she tells me when she is ready. That is, I have come to understand, one of the things a good listener does. She told me once, in the tower in the dark, after she had set down her instruments and we were simply looking at the sky together, that the thing she had always known about herself, the thing she could not make fit inside a pack's arrangement, the thing that had finally separated her quietly and permanently from the settlement where a man had looked elsewhere, was that she was not made for the narrow story, the bounded world. The settled certainty of always knowing which family you belonged to and what the edges of your life looked like. She was made for the reading, for the watching, for the long, slow movement of light across dark that told you, if you knew how to look, everything you needed to know about what was coming. "Then you understand," I said, "why it took me 4 days." She turned and looked at me. "Tell me." "I was not made for the narrow story either," I said. "I was made for the kingdom, the long view, the patient work. I am not a man who acts quickly on things he does not fully understand." I paused. But I did understand by the 4th day. I understood it clearly. "You could have written sooner," she said, but her voice was warm with it. Warm in the way that was not criticism, but was simply the true thing stated plainly. Because she was someone who found the plain truth more companionable than the comfortable approximation. "I could have," I agreed. "I will not be slow again." She took my hand in the dark, on the tower roof, with the stars turning in their slow course overhead and the wolves quiet in the yard below us, and the hold breathing its stone-cold breath around us, and the mark warm and certain on both our wrists. The northern horizon was very clear. She had told me, the previous week, that the deep cold coming in the 3rd month would be harder than usual, that the pressure in the northern quarter had a particular quality she associated with long winters, but that the spring following would be the earliest in 7 years. She had said this with the comfortable authority of someone who had been reading that sky for most of her adult life and trusted what it told her. I had scheduled the supply runs accordingly. My quartermaster had raised an eyebrow. I had let him. I had held a kingdom alone for 9 years and had called the weight of it by other names. I had not known that a woman with a sky chart and a lantern was making her way north through the first frost, and that 31 wolves were already turning toward the gate before she arrived, and that the oldest wolf in the yard was waiting at a door he had never waited at before, reading something in the air that I would take 11 more days to read clearly. The wolves knew. I am simply glad I listened to them.